My name is Dani Moore. I have a doctorate in clinical and forensic psychology. I'm an advocate and a survivor of Larry Nassar. I first got into gymnastics when I was probably around 4. I absolutely loved it. It was so much fun until it wasn't. There were times where I just didn't feel right. And in hindsight, it was probably because Nassar was in the back room of the gym and we would go back there and stretch a lot. Also, the coach that oversaw my team was verbally and physically abusive, would always yell. He never hit me, but he would throw water bottles or things like that. Around 10 years old, when my mom and dad were kind of like, do you really want to do this? Like, this is not fun for you. And I kind of wavered back and forth and decided that I would stop. But before that, I got hurt. I slipped a disc in my back. And as a 10-year-old, that's not normal. That disc ended up pressing on a nerve and my whole left leg went numb and I couldn't walk. That was the end of my competitive gymnastics career right there. Ended up going back into gymnastics as a high schooler. My coach and my primary care doctor, I was referred to see Larry Nassar for the injury because he was the Olympic gymnast doctor. So it was like a privilege to go see him. So I was referred to him. I went there. Obviously, I went with one of my parents. During one of the first sessions where he abused me, my dad was actually in the room, but he was able to use his body to cover up that line of sight. So it was, really confusing as a 14-year-old, and I guess I would say I was a very young 14-year-old. So it was really confusing, okay, this is a doctor, I know doctors, touch you in places. My dad's in the room, this must be okay. But it was incredibly uncomfortable. I remember kind of sinking my body into the table, even though I couldn't, but trying to get away from him in a sense. This continued, then it escalated when I started driving myself. Because I turned 16, I got an old car, I was able to drive to and from practice because that was a lot, and to and from appointments. Nassar was trusted, but as soon as the parent wasn't around, that's when the abuse escalated. And I would try to make it so he didn't have access to me, so I'd wear my leotard and spandex shorts, but he'd always make you change into these really baggy shorts. And that continued until I was 18 and stopped gymnastics. But during that time, there was a few things in terms of grooming that he did. First, he was, he had that reputation, of course. And he relied on that as well. He was well known in the community. But he had pictures of Olympic gymnasts on the wall and oh, we can get you better and you can get back into gymnastics. He gave me bag tags, luggage tags and pins from the 1996 Olympics, I believe, or 2000 Olympics. So I was oh, this is awesome. I have some actual things from the Olympics. Kind of made you in your mind split that evil part to that nice part. And it's hard to, bring those two things back together. Larry Nassar was now the former Olympic gymnast doctor. He started off as a trainer. He continued to grow because of the university. The med school relied on him, things like that. He continued to be the Olympic gymnast doctor until, I believe, the 2016 games. He actually quit before that because he knew this case was coming out. So, he resigned. Gymnastics is one of those sports that's very different from other sports. I played other sports growing up as well just to try things out. And it's that feeling of being able to propel yourself through the air and hopefully land, but you're doing that with your own strength and your own body. The timeline is pretty long. So I graduated in 2003 from high school, and I disclosed the abuse in 2016. And that was because the article in the Indy Star came out detailing the abuse. When I read the article, I thought I was reading my own story. And there was an attorney listed, and I immediately called him because I needed to know my rights. It was quite a while, but a lot of survivors don't disclose abuse for a long time. I guess when I looked back during that time frame, I kind of saw Nassar as this all good person. He was friendly, he was caring, and kind of blocked out the bad. So I split that. That's a coping mechanism as well to deal with the stress. But as soon as that abuse, I read that article, everything came crashing down and all the pieces started to fit together. I didn't know what to do with myself during that time. I think I kind of blocked it out just to kind of cope because it was so overwhelming. I was like, oh, this isn't too big of a deal. It was so long ago. I'm okay. I was completely wrong. But it worked for a few weeks. So, and then I started to have all of our problems, depression and anxiety, a lot of PTSD symptoms. The depression and PTSD just got too bad. Since the age of 10, I've had back pain. It wasn't obviously as bad when I was younger, but once I reached, it was 2012, my first back surgery. So a year prior, I started to have the same type of symptoms in terms of my leg going numb, a lot of like pressure in my back. And I was still active. I'd go to the gym, things like that. And at this time, I was in grad school. So my first back surgery was in 2012. It helped for a little while, but then things got worse again. So I had a spinal cord stimulator implanted into my back. So that is a battery that sits underneath your skin, and then you have wires that go up your spinal cord. And so what that does is it sends electrical signals into the wire and then down my spinal cord, and that blocks some of the pain signals from actually getting to my brain. So it's very helpful. So I had that in 2016. And then I had, again, more symptoms, a lot of pain. The spinal cord stimulator wasn't covering it. And my third back surgery in 2017. Then I had another surgery in 2019, and so that was a fusion. For the prior surgeries, they were just trying to like cut off the disc to relieve pressure from the nerves because they didn't want to do a fusion. They ended up having to. So 2019 was my first fusion. And then in 2020, my battery in my back started to fail, and they knew that, or they x-rayed, and the wires had shifted, so it wasn't working as well as it could be. So in 2020, I had a spinal cord stimulator replacement, and that helped for a little bit, barely. I still needed that replacement because that battery needs to be charged. So I actually have a little charger I place over my skin and it charges. But when it was charging, it would get hot, and that's not good. So they needed to replace it anyways. I was driving home from work, and I usually call my mom on the way home from work. And during that call, she was like, guess who was arrested? I'm like, who? And she's like, Larry Nassar. And immediately, I was like, that doesn't surprise me. And then next question immediately after that was, why doesn't that surprise me? Because I was sexually abused. And that was before my mom told me he was arrested for abuse. I quickly got off the phone with her because I was freaking out. I didn't want her to hear that because, I needed a minute to process things. And that's when I went home and read I Googled what happened, and the IndyStar article with Rachel Denhollander's story popped up, and I started reading it, and I thought I was reading my own story of abuse. And it honestly wasn't until about 2 weeks later that I told my mom. It was a lot. I wanted to talk to the attorney because I'm in forensic psychology, there's a lot of moving pieces to cases. I needed to take control, and then I could, talk to other people about it. So the attorney was the first to know. I was actually working at a prison, and this prison was a specialty prison. So it was for individuals who were deemed too dangerous to be released from prison. And this was after they had served their prison term. And so this means the population had multiple sex offenses, murder. So I'm in a facility with sex offenders. That took a long time to kind of wrap my head around too. Why was I drawn to this? Trauma can do some very strange things to your brain. But kind of realizing that when I walked into the prison, I knew who was, bad. I knew the guards were, they were in a different uniform. So I could easily piece that out. I think that was very subconscious. And then within a prison, once you leave for the day, you're done. You don't have on-call patients, things like that you would have in different settings. I didn't initially go into the forensic psychology to work with sex offenders, but how the training goes is once you're done with your classes, you go into an internship, and that process, you don't really have a choice in where you go. So I went to a place that had a lot of outpatient sex offender. So after I realized that I was abused, it was overwhelming. I'm really good at pushing down emotions, and then they manifest physically. It's not healthy. So I was at work. I stood up to go to group or to my supervisor's office, and I got kind of dizzy and felt really funny. My chest hurt, and I looked on my watch, and my heart rate was at 180, and I had just been sitting down. So basically I was sprinting, sitting down. I called my supervisor. They came in to my office. It's pretty embarrassing. They brought the nursing staff down. They rolled me out of the prison. My boss took me to the hospital, and they found out that I was going through SVT, and that's supraventricular tachycardia. So your heart rate is going super fast when it's not supposed to. Because I was dealing with the heart issues starting in 2016, it was something to focus on. And so it took my mind not completely off of the pending cases that were going on, but they were a distraction. Not a good distraction, of course, but it got me through the next, 2 years. So it was leading up to January of 2018, and I believe 6 months before, they found the child pornography on his computer, and he was pled guilty to it and sentenced federally to 10 years in prison. Then he decided to plead guilty to a few of the charges of sexual abuse. And, that sentence was, 40 to 170 years in prison. So it's a life sentence. So because of all the health issues that I had, and I had a back surgery in that time, I was so focused on that I didn't give too much thought into, what was coming next. The months leading up to January of 2018, which is when we gave our impact statements, It was, again, a mess. I didn't go home for Christmas. I was living in Chicago at the time because I didn't want to be in the same area as where the abuse happened. And constantly on the local news, you would have, stories about Nassar and what was going to happen. And I didn't want to be around it. So then came the time to kind of make the decision of, do you want to speak in court? And there was multiple options that they gave in terms of, you can write a letter to the judge. You can write a letter and have somebody else read it. You can make a video. You can, write a letter and be in the court and have somebody else read it. Or, you can write your own statement and read it in court. And for some reason, and I'm not quite sure exactly why, but I needed to read my statement to him. And my family and friends at the time were like, why are you going to put yourself through this? Because I was in really bad shape emotionally. And I was just dead set on doing, reading my own statements and confronting him in court. So I did. It took a long time to write that statement, but, I got through it and was able to confront him in court. So after the impact statements were read, nobody knew, or I didn't know, how much publicity it would get. I read my statement in the morning of and had no idea what was about to come. So there's a lot of media attention, and after the sentencing was over, people were like, it's over, you can kind of move forward. No. That's really when the healing started to begin for a lot of us, because when there's an active case, you're looking towards, what comes next in this case? What kind of paperwork do I need to get together? What kind of statements do I need to make? What's next in this process? And after the sentencing, you're then stuck with your emotions. You finally have to deal with that trauma, with that sadness. And it was hard. So there was some very low lows right after the sentencing. We did form a community of survivors, which is very odd. Our case was very unique. But we were able to stay connected. And one woman, her name's Grace French, her idea was, let's develop our own nonprofit. Let's make the change ourselves. Because we were getting a lot of pushback from Michigan State University, USA Gymnastics, and US Olympic Committee in terms of they weren't changing. They were kind of giving lip service to, we'll do this or this, but we never actually saw the change. And some of their policies got worse before they got better. So we're like, we just need to do this ourselves. So we did. It was about 6 months after this sentencing that there was a group of us in Washington, D.C. for a congressional hearing in regards to issues with Michigan State University and the president at the time and his conduct. So we were there to have that survivor presence. So we had met and decided to do this thing. Me having the psychology background, that was helpful, but I had no idea how to run a business or a nonprofit. Luckily, Grace comes from a marketing background, and we had others that were more versed in this, and it took off. So it's been 5 years since we started the nonprofit. We actually just celebrated our 5th year anniversary, and we named the nonprofit the Army of Survivors because unfortunately it took an army of women to take down one offender, and that shouldn't happen. But we stayed together as that army to help others. So the first few years, it was hard getting started, like any business, but over the past 2 or 3 years, I'd say 3 years, we've taken off, and we're growing so large we can't keep up with it. And that's sad because there's so much abuse in sport that has not been talked about or been uncovered. So they're reaching out for help, and we want to help them. We're trying our best, but we can't keep up. So we are addressing everyone that we can, but we've been able to be invited to some pretty big sports organizations like FIFA. So we're working with them and some consulting, trying to change policies. And then we worked with the National Women's Soccer League as well to try to change policies. We do work in terms of local government and on the federal side, trying to change the agency that abuse is reported to within the United States, because it's incredibly flawed, and that's really minimizing that how flawed it is. So there's that aspect as well, and then being a support for those survivors coming forward, and then trying to prevent the abuse as well. So there's that education piece. There's educating parents and the athletes themselves, even the young athletes. And we've noticed a trend in terms of there's a lot of abuse with coaches, but there's a lot of coaches that really are amazing, but we wish would have spoken up. And that happened with the Nassar case. There was coaches, there were other people who didn't speak up, to kind of go against the Nassar reputation, how big it was, is their career on the line? Should they be reporting this? How do I do it? So we've actually developed a program called Compassionate Coach. So it's an 8-week program that walks coaches at all levels, from, T-ball to professional coaching, to have the coaches be more trauma informed and what they can do to reduce how, they deal with athletes who might have had that trauma, and just to, strengthen that aspect of sports. So we've been pretty busy, to say the least. I will say that this advocacy piece that, I do and some others do is really healing for myself and has become that passion project. But I have talked to other survivors where they're like, I just don't think I can do that. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to, be a vocal advocate. As long as you're taking care of yourself and concentrating on your own healing, that's what you guys have to do. Everybody's different in their healing process, so you can't judge your own healing process with somebody else's. So that's important to keep in mind as well.